everyone, and welcome to our next edition of the SCHOTT Pharma podcast. The topic today is glass or polymer, key aspects when selecting a prefillable syringe. So today we will be talking about syringes, and to be more specific, prefilled syringes. Let's dig a little deeper in order to gain understanding about the right syringe material. For that, I have with me Tom van Ginneken, our expert in the topic. He's Head of Global Product Management for Polymer Solutions at SCHOTT Pharma. Hi, Tom. Nice to have you here again.
Hi, nice. Hi, Nils. Glad to be here.
So, Tom, let's start. We are talking about choosing the right material for prefilled syringes. But let's go one step back. What exactly and what essentially is a prefilled syringe?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So when we talk about syringes, we often use the generic term syringes, but there are actually two types of syringes, and it's very important that we are aware what type of syringe we are talking about. So the first type of syringe is a disposable syringe. Typically, it's made out of polypropylene material, and the typical intended use is not as a drug container, but rather to transfer a drug from a vial and use it as an injection device. And the second type is a pre-filled syringe. So this syringe already comes as with the drug delivered inside, ready to be administered. And even here you have two different material types. So you have a glass pre-filled syringe and you have a typical advanced polymer pre-filled syringe. So those are in short the difference between the pre-filled syringe and the disposable syringe.
Okay, thank you. I think this is important as a starting point. So we talk here about these most advanced, let's say, syringes, the ones that are already pre-filled and ready to be administered. Next question is, why should a drug developer look into this option of bringing the drug to the market in a prefilled syringe? Why not just staying into a vial or an ampule?
Yeah, fair question. I almost do not know where to start. There are so many advantages actually of a pre-filled syringe. So the first one is it's a container and drug delivery system into one. And just for this, there's already three different advantages for this. And we performed an internal study with 660 nurses and doctors around the world. And 84% of them actually prefer pre-filled syringes over traditional containers. And now, why actually they prefer pre-filled syringes over the traditional containers? The first one is there is less manual preparation steps needed compared to the standard, let's say, vial container. So with a standard vial container, you still have to transfer the content of the vial into an injection device. And in all of those preparation steps, there can be a lot of manual mistakes. So there's a lot of, let's say, room for improvement there. In a pre-filled syringe, because it comes pre-filled, it already comes in the right dose, the right concentration, so nothing needs to be prepared. So it's much easier for the healthcare worker as well as much safer for the patient. Second advantage is it saves time, right? Because all of those preparation steps, they need to be prepared by the healthcare worker. Besides all the risks of medical mistakes, it just saves time. And the last advantage is waste. If you compare it to the traditional vial and let's say disposable syringe configuration, you always have two different systems with according with the packaging, right? I mean, even a disposable syringe comes even in a secondary packaging as well. And a pre-filled syringe, it's just one system. Again, it's the container and drug delivery device into one, so less waste. Now, those were a couple of the advantages of let's say, the integration of drug delivery and a container into one, but also from a vial to a pre-filled syringe. There's some other advantages as well. First one is drug overfill. If you compare a vial, which has a typical overfill of up to 30%, a prefilled syringe only has an overfill of maybe 2 to 5%. So if you have extremely expensive medication, this difference is definitely going to make a difference. And the last example is you can differentiate your drug into the market. So for instance, if the originator only offers a vial and you're going to bring a generic to the market, you have the possibility to also make a differentiation in terms of make it easier for healthcare workers by offering a prefilled syringe. So I would say those are some of the advantages of a prefilled syringe over more traditional storage containers.
Thank you. Clear and yeah, sounds pretty logic. What are the main criteria that needs to be considered when selecting, let's say, the right prefilled syringe, Tom?
Yes, the prefilled syringe is a complex system. So you have a lot of different components. First of all, you have the barrel, you have a tip cap, you have a plunger rod, you have siliconization. So a lot of different systems that play into the complexity of this this system. Now, you also need to take into consideration the intended use of the syringe. So how is it going to be used? Because that's the most important factor in choosing what kind of prefilled syringe you are more preferred to. So, for instance, a syringe for home care application that might look different from a syringe for pain management in a hospital. The one needs an self-administration device and the other has an infusion pump, for instance. So obviously those two syringes, they will be already different in shapes, in forms. Next example is what kind of body tissue is required that the drug is administered to. So there's a wide variety of different applications: intramuscular, sub-Q, intravitreal, IV. So there's a lot of different applications, and that might change the choice of your container or your syringe, either with a stake needle, without a stake needle. So those are some of the considerations. Also, drug storage. For instance, if you have, for instance, an extremely low temperature storage, and, a glass syringe or a polymer syringe might make some difference. Again, the originator and generics question. If you want to copy an originator, you might want to have the identical syringe than the originator has. Another aspect to consider is fill finishing equipment. So you might already have an elaborate fill finishing installed base, maybe for one syringe or another. So if you look for a new project, you might not want to completely convert your existing fill finishing lines and want to use as much as you already have. So you might therefore want kind of a platform syringe which can run on your existing lines. So those are all examples of what kind of considerations might play into effect in choosing what kind of syringe you want.
Yes, I see. So many factors, I would say, and every one of which needs to be evaluated in detail. I'd like to focus on the topic of the webinar session we'll have. So the material side of the prefilled syringe as a, let's say, selection point. In general, what kind of materials are there and how do they impact the choice of the prefilled syringe?
Yeah, so typically we see three main categories, or let's say two materials. So first you have glass, and then you have polymers. And even in the polymer segment, you have high-end polymers, such as COC or COP. And then you have others, such as the polypropylenes. Now, even for today, and even for the the Pharmaversity event, we won't really focus on polypropylene syringes. We also do not really recommend it. Typically, polypropylene syringes are disposable syringes. They're not really developed for long-term drug containment solutions. Even in terms of drug stability, it's not the greatest solution. They have poor barrier properties. They have too much siliconization. So just in general, we don't really recommend to use polypropylene. So if we then focus on the two other main categories, we still have glass. And glass is absolutely great. Glass is still the golden standard. It's obviously it's inorganic of composition. And what we use in SCHOTT Pharma is borosilicate glass type 1. It's by far the market standard in glass type 1. And this glass is even being used by our competitors. So just to give a short example of how broadly in the market this type of glass is being used. Some properties of this glass, well, it has great chemical resistance. It's really inert, so it means that it doesn't really react with its environment, and that all contributes, let's say, to a great drug stability. Also, barrier properties. Glass has superior barrier properties, almost no ingress of any kind of gas, either oxygen or the water vapor. So it's definitely the standard. It's the golden standard. So glass syringes are the standard. It's well established in the market and practically for all kind of primary containment. So either it's been vials, ampoules, syringes, cartridges. A lot of fill finishing experience and capacity in this space, also regulatory track record. So glass is by far the golden standard. That being said, but glass is not flawless. It also has some drawbacks. So for instance, in order to better process the glass, additional ions are being added to the glass to add certain glass melting properties. And these ions that are being added can also can leach out of the glass again into the drug. So that could be an issue for some drug stability issues. So that's, for instance, the reason why for type 1 glass you still see hydrolytic resistance testing, or a pH shift could happen as well. So that is one drawback. Also, during further converting steps, so going from the glass canes, the glass tubes into glass containers, for instance, prefilled syringes, small traces of heavy metals can get into the syringe because of this forming of the syringe. Also something to pay notice to. And lastly, glass is more prone to breakage. So that also makes it more difficult to make in big container sizes. So those are, let's say, the three small disadvantages or drawbacks from glass. Now, if we jump to the high quality polymer part of it, we have COC and COP, so which stands for cyclic olefin copolymer or polymer. And this is a high-end technical polymer that's been developed about 30 to 40 years ago. And another application, for instance, is the optic application. So just as another example of the great optical properties that this material has. And similar to glass, it's also really inert, which means extremely low interaction with its environment, great for drug stability. Now, these syringes are being produced with injection molding, and this process also provides some advantages. So which means that these polymer syringes, they actually offer more design flexibility. So it's easy to customize certain designs. It's also more precise, and you have smaller tolerances because of the injection molding. And what I just mentioned as one of the drawbacks of glass is definitely an advantage here. It's the ability to produce bigger formats. So in terms of 5 ml, 10 ml, 20, 50 ml size syringes, much easier to produce with polymer than it is with glass. And one of the last advantages here is, the technology, the production technology process, as well as the material, there's almost no heavy metals or ions in this process or in this material. So again, for drug stability, great advantage. Again, also this material, it's not perfect. Even here, there are some drawbacks. First one, it's still a polymer, and polymers tend to be semi-permeable from a material perspective. So, which means that barrier properties are definitely not as good as glass. This can be relevant, obviously, for oxygen-sensitive molecules. Their glass might be the preferred option. Also, the polymer material, it's not suitable for all kind of drugs. So for instance, oily substances. These oily substances can react with the COC material of the syringe and can degrade the material. And the last small downside is that compared to a glass syringe where you have really good standardization in terms of glass types as well as dimensions, you don't see that really with polymer. So every polymer syringe manufacturer has different grades of polymer, either COC or COP, as well as the dimensions, because it's injection molding. Everybody can make their own dimensions, which makes it a little bit more challenging to offer the entire syringe system in terms with plunger and plunger rods. So that's a bit more, let's say, the downside. So that the last point, it reduces the potential for dual sourcing, for instance.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So now you bring me to the million-dollar question. Which material is best then for a prefilled syringe?
Yeah, good question. Well, there's definitely not one material superior over the other. Both have their strengths and both have their drawbacks. And what I mentioned before, it all depends on the application and the intended use. So depending on the application, either a glass syringe or a polymer syringe might make more sense. Mentioned this a couple of times as well. So glass is definitely the preference of choice. It's the golden standard in the market. I would roughly say that 90% of the market of prefilled syringe is still with glass. But there's still a growing amount of applications that actually benefit more from the advantages that the polymer syringe provide. And maybe to make it a little easier, I'll give some examples of certain applications that benefit more of a polymer. So the first one is aesthetic injections. So typically here we have a drug which is called hyaluronic acid, which is highly viscous, and which is being used to reduce the wrinkles in the face. And during the fill finishing process, one of the last steps is steam sterilization. And the combination of this steam sterilized product with the high viscous drug with a really small needle, because you want to eliminate pain as much as possible and you're injecting into the face, you need a lot of force to empty the syringe. And this can lead to needle pop-off or disconnection between the needle and the luer lock. Now, with a polymer syringe, this risk is highly minimized because the luer lock is integrated into an injection molding. So there's no disconnection between the luer lock and the syringe. And therefore, you can also twist in the needle really firmly without the needle popping out of the luer lock. In addition there, because of the design flexibility that polymer offers, you could develop a syringe with a smaller inner diameter of the syringe, and this reduced inner diameter offers a easier and smoother emptying of the syringe. So that's one example. Next example is prefilled syringes used in a hospital environment. Typical application or medication there is pain medication, acute care drugs, essential drugs. And typically they come in larger formats. So 5 ml, 10 ml, 20, 50 ml syringes. And this is just incredibly difficult to produce in glass. Because you start with the glass tubes, and you have to reform those tubes into a container size of a 20, 50 ml. So you need a lot of heat, a lot of energy, and these kind of glass containers, they might be a bit more prone to breakage. They might not be as precise in terms of dimensions and tolerance as the polymer container is, and that can be really important for the other, let's say, environment which are they being used in. So in combination with Luer lock devices or with infusion pumps. So that's why you really need, let's say, low dimensional tolerances to be compatible with those external devices. And my last example here for why you would choose polymer over glass could be low temperature applications. And there's an increasing number of applications where drug storage is now done at -80 degrees. And even moving forward, I think this is a segment that will grow even further, not only with the mRNA applications, but also with cell and gene therapies. And the COC material has more similar thermal expansion coefficient properties compared with the rubber formulations. So which means that if the rubber shrinks, the polymer container shrinks at a more similar rate than it does with glass. So which means that at those extreme low temperatures, the risk of losing container closure integrity is reduced with a polymer container over a glass container. So those were some examples of applications where polymer might be preferred over glass, but as I said, glass is definitely still the standard of choice. And I'll give you one example: a heparin syringe. Heparin is an anticoagulant, and it's really frequently used. And all the requirements for this kind of application all point into the direction of a glass prefilled syringe. So in terms of high quantities are needed, which require actually dual sourcing. This kind of application is also a price sensitive application. This kind of syringe needs compatibility with either safety devices, needle safety devices, or even with auto injectors or drug delivery devices. So this example, for instance, it's clear that a glass prefilled syringe is definitely the preferred product. So just to summarize, I mean, both materials are great. Both have their advantages, both have the disadvantages. The good thing about SCHOTT is that SCHOTT Pharma is offering both products in its portfolio, which means that SCHOTT does not have any preference between a glass container or a polymer container, and that we can support customers in the process to find the right material for their application.
Okay, Tom, thanks a lot. Coming now to my last question. If we need to compare again the two products from a sustainability and green footprint perspective, how do they compare?
Yeah, good question. Definitely a relevant one, and we get this more often lately. Now, first, before I jump into that kind of question, so first, SCHOTT is working on a zero carbon program with the goal being climate neutrality in 2030. So we will be working on transitioning to green energy, reducing energy consumption, as well as look at the product portfolio to understand and improve the material life cycles and develop then obviously a more green product. And this actually applies for both glass containers as well as polymer products. So now, if you look at the carbon footprint of both glass and polymer prefilled syringe, they are actually almost identical. And I'm sure this will be a surprise to many listeners here. And the reason is that the biggest driver is actually not the material of the syringe, but rather the packaging materials. So the top, the nest, the Tyvek foil, the bag, the box, the pallet. So there's a lot of secondary and tertiary packaging involved in ready-to-use syringes. And going forward, this will be the main focus of SCHOTT Pharma in terms of sustainability, is to lower this waste as well as maybe reuse more of those components, so to find a sustainable solution, let's say, for those packaging materials.
Great, clear. In fact, we're having a session on that very soon. So thanks a lot to the audience for hearing this podcast. Thanks, Tom. Take care and bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.